On a rainy night, a billionaire enters a diner, only to discover that the waitress serving him is someone he never expected to see again. The rain drummed against the windshield of Ethan Carter's sleek black Aston Martin as he pulled into a dimly lit street in downtown Chicago. The city's usual chaos was subdued by the storm, leaving the streets slick with reflections of neon lights. Ethan wasn't sure why he had turned down this road. He was supposed to be heading to an exclusive investors' dinner at the Astoria, where champagne flowed like water and deals worth millions were sealed over gold-plated steaks. Yet, something about the small diner on the corner pulled him in. It was nothing extravagant, just an old-fashioned establishment with a faded sign that read, "Benny's Diner." The warm, golden glow from inside contrasted sharply with the cold, rainy night. Through the fogged-up glass, Ethan could see a handful of people sitting at booths, chatting over coffee and comfort food. He had no reason to be here, and yet he felt drawn to it. Shaking off the unease, he stepped out of his car, pulling his coat tightly around him. The bell above the door jingled as he walked in, and a rush of warmth and nostalgia hit him. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, buttered toast, and sizzling bacon, a scent he hadn't experienced in years. Unlike the soulless, high-end restaurants he frequented, this place had life in it. It felt real. He took a seat in the corner, deliberately choosing a booth near the window. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Perhaps just a break from the relentless world of billion-dollar negotiations and corporate takeovers. A waitress passed by, her hands full with plates of steaming food. Something about her made his heart stop. Ethan's eyes followed her movements. There was something eerily familiar about her. The way she moved, the warmth in her voice, the quiet patience with which she handled customers. His fingers tightened around the menu, his mind racing through distant memories. The woman wove effortlessly between tables, offering refills and gentle smiles, completely unaware that she had just thrown Ethan Carter into an emotional whirlwind. She turned toward him. "Good evening," she greeted with a polite smile. "What can I get for you tonight?" Ethan froze. The voice. It was her. He barely registered his own response as he ordered the first thing his eyes landed on, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables. His voice sounded distant, foreign even, as if someone else were speaking through him. The waitress scribbled his order on her notepad and turned to walk away. Before he could stop himself, he spoke. "Wait." She paused, looking back at him with questioning eyes. Ethan's throat felt dry. Up close, he could see it now. The same warm brown eyes, the soft kindness in her features, the quiet strength behind them. She had a few more lines on her face, but it was unmistakable. It was Miss Bennett, his teacher, the only person who had ever believed in him when no one else had. But she didn't recognize him. As she turned away to tend to another table, Ethan felt his entire world tilt. How could she be here? Why was she waiting tables? What had happened to the woman who once told him he was destined for great things? His mind swirled with questions, but one thing was clear. He couldn't leave without finding out the truth. Fate had brought him here for a reason. Ethan sat frozen in his seat, his fingers resting on the edge of the table, his mind racing. It couldn't be a coincidence. Olivia Bennett, the woman who had once been his greatest source of encouragement, was standing right there, serving coffee and balancing plates like she was just another face in the crowd. How was this possible? He had always imagined that she was out there, still changing lives, still inspiring students the way she had once inspired him. Instead, she was here, in a small diner, waiting tables. It didn't make sense. He needed to be sure. As Olivia passed by again, Ethan raised a hand, signaling for her. She approached with the same kind smile, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside him. "Everything okay with your meal?" she asked, her voice soft but professional. Ethan hesitated for a moment. How was he supposed to ask this? He swallowed hard and forced himself to speak. "Yes, the meal is perfect," he said, then paused. His voice felt heavier now, like every word was carrying the weight of the past. "But can I ask you something personal?" Olivia blinked, clearly surprised. "Personal?" she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "Well, I suppose so. What's on your mind?" Ethan took a deep breath. "What's your name?" She hesitated, as if trying to gauge whether the question was harmless or something more. "Olivia," she said finally. "Olivia Bennett." That was it. The name hit him like a tidal wave, confirming what he already knew, but had been too afraid to believe. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He felt like the room was spinning, like time itself had folded in on itself and dragged him back to a small classroom years ago. His hands gripped the edge of the table. His voice came out quiet, but firm. "Were you a teacher before, at Willow Creek Elementary School?" The moment the words left his lips, Olivia's expression changed completely. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, he saw something flicker across her face. Shock, recognition, and something else. Pain. She took a small step back, as if someone had just uncovered a secret she had long buried. "Yes," she said slowly, as if the word itself was difficult to say. But that was a long time ago." Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You don't remember me, do you?" Olivia studied his face closely, her brow furrowed. Something about him was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. "I'm sorry," she said honestly, shaking her head. "You look familiar, but I can't—" Ethan took a deep breath. This was the moment. "It's me," he said, his voice softer now. Ethan Carter. I was in your 5th grade class." Olivia's entire body went still. For a moment, she didn't move. She just stared at him, as if the name had unlocked something buried deep within her memory. Then, recognition dawned. Her hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes welled up with tears. "Ethan?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded, a small, bittersweet smile forming on his lips. "The very same," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Though I'm not so little anymore." Olivia sank into the chair across from him, uninvited, her legs too shaky to stand. She was still processing it. The quiet, uncertain boy who had once stayed after class for extra help with math, who had barely spoken above a whisper, had grown into a man sitting across from her. A billionaire, no less. And yet, he had never forgotten her. Ethan watched as realization washed over her. And for the first time in his life, he saw the woman who had always been his rock, completely speechless. For a long moment, Olivia Bennett simply sat there, staring at Ethan in stunned silence. The boy she had once taught, the boy she had spent extra hours encouraging, had grown into a man she never expected to meet again. And not just any man, a billionaire, a household name in the tech industry. Her lips parted, but no words came out. How could she ever have imagined this moment? Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "It's really me, Miss Bennett," he said, using the name he had called her so many years ago. "And I never forgot what you did for me." Olivia let out a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. I can't believe it," she whispered. "Ethan Carter, the quiet boy in the back of my classroom, always doubting himself." Ethan chuckled lightly, though there was an undeniable sadness in his eyes. "Yeah, that was me. And you. You were the only one who ever believed in me." For a moment, the two of them sat there, drowning in memories. Olivia saw flashes of her old classroom, stacks of books, a chalkboard covered in math problems, a young Ethan sitting with his head down, convinced he wasn't good enough. And then she remembered the hours she spent with him after school, helping him, pushing him, telling him he was more than his circumstances. And now, he had become everything she once told him he could be. But then, Ethan's expression darkened. His voice softened, filled with something almost hesitant, almost afraid. "Miss Bennett," he said carefully, "I have to ask, what happened? Why are you here? I thought you'd still be teaching. You always said it was your dream." At that, Olivia's gaze dropped to the table. The light in her eyes dimmed, and for the first time that night, she looked truly tired. Ethan could feel it, a weight, a burden she had carried for far too long. She exhaled slowly before answering. "I did love teaching," she admitted. "It was everything to me. But," she swallowed, her hands clenching into small fists. "Life doesn't always go the way you plan." Ethan said nothing, giving her the space to continue. "There were budget cuts at Willow Creek," Olivia explained, her voice tinged with quiet bitterness. "The school was struggling, and they had to let some teachers go. I was one of the first." Ethan's stomach twisted. But why you? You were one of the best teachers there. Olivia gave a sad, knowing smile. That didn't matter. Seniority, funding, it was all politics. I fought to stay. I fought to keep teaching, to do what I loved, but... She trailed off, shaking her head. It wasn't enough. Ethan felt a sharp pang in his chest. The woman who had given him everything had lost the one thing that mattered most to her. And after that? He asked quietly. Olivia let out a hollow laugh. After that? I tried to find another teaching job, but schools weren't hiring, and I had bills to pay. Rent, groceries, medical expenses. I didn't have the luxury of waiting. I needed a paycheck, so I took the first job I could find. She gestured around the diner with a small, tired shrug. And here I am. Ethan's jaw clenched. His grip on the table tightened. This wasn't fair. This woman, this incredible, selfless woman who had changed his life, who had given him the confidence to dream, had been tossed aside, forgotten by the very system she had devoted her life to. And she had been suffering all this time, while he had been building an empire. Ethan felt something burn in his chest. Guilt, anger, determination. This isn't right, he murmured. You deserve so much more than this. Olivia shrugged again, but this time it wasn't out of acceptance. It was resignation. It's not so bad, she said, forcing a small smile. I meet interesting people here, and it's honest work. Besides, I've learned to be thankful for what I have. Ethan stared at her. That was what made Olivia Bennett so incredible. Even after everything, after losing her dream, after struggling for years, she still found a way to see the good. But he couldn't accept this. This wasn't how her story was supposed to end. His mind was already racing, forming a plan. He had the power to change this. And he would. Because she was the reason he had made it this far in the first place. And now, it was time to return the favor. Ethan sat in silence for a moment, processing everything Olivia had just told him. The woman who had shaped his future, who had given him the confidence to dream, had lost everything. And yet, she still found the strength to be grateful for what little she had. But he couldn't accept this. Olivia deserved more than a life of survival. She deserved everything she had given to others. Opportunity, stability, and hope. Ethan leaned forward, locking eyes with her. Do you remember what you used to tell me? He asked softly. Olivia tilted her head, confused. What do you mean? His voice was steady, filled with conviction. You're going to do great things someday. You just have to believe. Recognition flashed in Olivia's eyes. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't say anything. You told me that when I was a kid, Ethan continued. When I doubted myself, when I thought I was worthless, you stayed after school to tutor me, encourage me when I wanted to quit, and push me to be better. His voice tightened. You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Olivia swallowed hard, her hands resting in her lap. She remembered. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it gently on the table and slid it toward her. Olivia's brow furrowed. What is this? Go ahead, Ethan said, his voice soft but insistent. With hesitant fingers, she picked up the box and slowly opened it. Inside was an exquisite silver bracelet, simple yet elegant. But what caught Olivia's breath wasn't the diamonds embedded along its surface. It was the engraving. To the teacher who gave me the world. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes glistening with unshed tears. She blinked rapidly, trying to find words, but none came. Ethan, she whispered. But before she could finish, he pulled out an envelope and placed it next to the bracelet. Olivia stared at it, hesitating. Open it, Ethan encouraged. With shaky hands, she unfolded the envelope and pulled out a check. The moment she saw the amount, she gasped audibly, her breath catching in her throat. Ethan, she stammered, shaking her head in disbelief. This is too much. I can't take this. Yes, you can, he said firmly. And you will. Olivia looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. Why are you doing this? Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. Because, he said, his voice thick with emotion, this is just a fraction of what I owe you. Olivia wiped at her tears, still trying to process what was happening. This isn't just money, Ethan continued. This is a second chance. You once gave me the confidence to chase my dreams. Now, I want to do the same for you." Olivia shook her head slightly, as if struggling to believe this was real. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her. "Just promise me one thing." Olivia blinked, waiting. "Promise me you'll use this to do something that makes you happy." Whether it was going back to teaching, traveling the world, or starting something new, Ethan didn't care. He just wanted her to have the freedom to choose her own path again. Tears streamed down Olivia's face, her hands trembling as she clutched the check. For the first time in years, hope flickered in her eyes. For a long moment, Olivia Bennett just sat there, staring at the check in her trembling hands. The numbers blurred behind the tears welling in her eyes. This couldn't be real. She looked up at Ethan, searching his face for some kind of explanation, some reason why he had done this. Why would a billionaire go out of his way to help a former teacher? But the answer was already in his eyes. Gratitude? Respect? A debt he felt he could never truly repay. Olivia swallowed hard, still struggling to process it all. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Ethan's lips curved into a small smile. "You already have," he said. "You just didn't know it." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "But this is too much. I don't deserve this." Ethan's expression hardened slightly and he leaned forward. "Yes, you do," he said firmly. "You gave me something money could never buy. You made me believe in myself when no one else did. This isn't charity, Olivia. It's what you've earned 100 times over." She pressed her lips together, looking back at the bracelet in the small velvet box. "To the teacher who gave me the world." The weight of those words settled deep in her chest. For years she had believed her efforts had gone unnoticed, that all those extra hours, all the passion she poured into her students, had disappeared into nothing. But now, sitting across from a man who had once been a lost little boy in the back of her classroom, she realized something. No act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. She took a deep breath, wiping the last of her tears. "What if I don't know what to do with this?" she asked, her voice still trembling. Ethan smiled. "Then take your time. You have the freedom to choose now. That's all I ever wanted to give you." Olivia stared at the check again. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. 1 year later, the cameras flashed like 1,000 tiny stars as Ethan Carter stepped onto the stage. The large auditorium buzzed with excitement, filled with educators, students, and business leaders from across the country. Tonight was a special night, the official launch of the Olivia Bennett Foundation. Ethan adjusted the microphone, smiling as he looked out at the crowd. "A year ago," he began, "I walked into a small diner on a rainy night. I didn't know it then, but that night would change my life all over again." Murmurs spread through the audience. Olivia Bennett stood off to the side of the stage, her hands clasped together, tears glistening in her eyes as she listened. "I was lucky enough to meet someone who had changed my life when I was just a kid, someone who saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself," Ethan continued. "That night, I realized something important. Success means nothing if we don't give back to those who helped us get there." The crowd erupted into applause, but Ethan wasn't finished. "That's why today, I'm proud to introduce the Olivia Bennett Foundation, dedicated to supporting teachers, funding classrooms, and ensuring that no educator ever has to walk away from their passion because of financial hardship." The applause grew even louder, echoing through the hall. Olivia wiped at her cheeks, overcome with emotion. She had never expected this. When Ethan had given her that check, she had hesitated to accept it, but in the end, she had used it not just for herself, but for others. She had gone back to teaching, this time with financial security and the ability to give more than ever before. She had even started a new program, mentoring young teachers and offering free tutoring to underprivileged kids. And now, standing here, she realized something profound. She had spent years believing that her impact had been lost. But it had never been lost. It had just taken time to return to her. As Ethan gestured toward her, the crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation. With a deep breath, Olivia walked onto the stage. She turned to Ethan, smiling. "You were always meant for great things.